Well, we have continuing coverage on the water woes across East Texas and the entire state. Now, the Texas Tribune has a new series on our water infrastructure, and Deep East Texas reporter Pooja joins us now to discuss it. Hello, Pooja. So tell us a little bit about the series that you guys are working on right now.
Sure, yeah. So we did this series looking at the state of water infrastructure across the state of Texas and really looking at some of the issues that are affecting pipes. So what it takes to get water from the plant over to consumer's house. We know that we've seen a lot of boil water notices over the past year. So we really wanted to dig into, why is that happening, and what are some of the solutions to that issue? And some of the reasons that we're seeing are, climate change is a big factor, as well as just the age of the pipes. A lot of these pipes date back to the 1960s or even earlier in some cases. We've seen some dating back to the 1800s. And then also population growth. So the state of Texas is growing very rapidly, and that puts a larger strain on some of that infrastructure.
Right, and I did a series about this last year looking at East Texas specifically, and they did mention those same problems. The demand is really high, but you're saying this is spanning outside of East Texas and across the entire state.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really, I think some of the issues are slightly different depending on where in the state you are. So East Texas has a pretty good supply of water. That's water supply is less of an issue in East Texas. In West Texas, we're seeing a lot more of the water supply issues. But in terms of like the age of the pipes themselves, that appears to be an issue that exists statewide, with some particularly challenging areas in East Texas.
Right, and I spoke to a few cities and they were saying that their pipes date back to even the 1920s, and some of them were 80 and 90 years old. And it's so expensive just to even replace those pipes. I mean, what solutions do you find to that?
Yeah, like you said, it's very expensive to replace the pipes, and especially for small local governments, they don't always have, a huge tax base. And we know in East Texas there are a bunch of small rural communities. And so I think, we found a few different solutions that are actually being tried. And I would say that there's a few different buckets. One of them is legislative solutions in terms of just getting more funding out to these communities. And there's a bill making its way through the legislature right now, Senate Bill 28, that includes some specific funding just for rural communities, so they would be prioritized for part of that funding. And then another solution that we kind of came across in our reporting is helping these communities actually access the money. So an issue appears to be that, applying to grants, applying to any kind of loan requires that you have your finances in order, and that you have a certain amount of funding kind of already in place so that you could repay the loan. And so there are some nonprofits, Communities Unlimited is one of them, that are kind of going into these towns and helping them kind of get their paperwork in order, get their finances in order to apply to the grants. Because the reality is that the pipes are getting quite old, and the situation is growing more and more dire. And so some of those solutions are kind of making their way through and potentially could help some of these smaller towns.
Yeah, I think we've been focusing a lot here and probably there too about the Senate bills and everything that's going through right now. And there's so many important issues that need to be addressed, but water makes up the majority of your body, and a lot of people aren't really discussing all these problems that they're seeing every day. And one of the places that you were looking at is Zavala, which is just southeast of Lufkin. So what can you tell us about their issues specifically?
Sure. So Zavala is one of those very particularly small towns, under 700 residents. So they have a pretty small tax base. They specifically have, they actually have a very unique type of well in their town that a number of people don't actually know or have the correct license to operate that well. So they're also having a workforce challenge, which is another challenge that exists in kind of across the state as well, and across the country, really, that there's a bit of a challenge of finding someone to be able to operate the well. Now they have someone in place now, a public works director who is who's working on the license and all of that. But they still have a bit of a funding problem. So one thing that he has done is kind of raise the water rates so by $4, and so that'll give them a bit more funding to kind of address some of the issues that come up if there's a catastrophe. You know, they had a boil water notice last year on Thanksgiving Day, and even on Christmas Eve, they had a lot of water issues that forced some of their employees to work that day. So they kind of have a number of issues on their hands and are working through them by trying to increase the rates and just kind of get by day to day with fixing leaks as they can.
Right, and the biggest inconvenience for people is these boil water notices. And of course, if the cities do get the funding to replace the piping and put in that new infrastructure, they're going to have to go under a boil water notice just to get it fixed. So it's kind of a repeating process, just trying to get all of this handled.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, those boil water notices are just skyrocketing. There've been, you know, I think the average that we were able to gather from the TCEQ was about 8 per day since the beginning of this year. So they're already going up, and you're right that, you know, if when they do replace the pipes, that means that they probably have to shut off the system and issue another boil water notice just to go through that process.
Yeah, a very complicated issue. I look forward to seeing your report, but thank you so much for joining us today, Pooja, and talking about this.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on.